Hello everybody, welcome to Digital Hammurabi. I am Megan, for those who have not joined us before. Joining me today is my husband, Dr. Josh, and the lovely Sarah. Sarah has the distinct honour of being one of our very first HAPS scholars. So she came on back in April, I think, and did an interview explaining what research she was planning on doing over the summer for our crowdfunded research scholarship. And she was voted as one of the top 3. So we're very excited to have her back and to hear how her summer went. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be back, tell you all what I've been doing this summer.
I can't wait. So to kick us off, would you mind, for those who didn't catch your initial interview, just giving a brief overview who you are, what you do, and then what your research project this summer was going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I am now a third-year PhD student in Assyriology at Brown University. We just started classes this week, so I say now I'm a third year. My project is really based in digitizing a lot of cuneiform objects. So Brown University has a collection of cuneiform tablets, foundation pegs, and I think we have one cylinder seal in our collection, and I've been making 3D models of them using photogrammetry this summer. I'll explain a little bit about what that is. And I've also been doing it as a sense of sort of putting together a more accessible way to view these objects, you know, just providing some definitions, explaining who the people are that are named in the objects, but also just, you know, having the models accessible. Right now, you know, you have to travel to see some of these objects. Reading from photos can be really difficult. So if you have a 3D object, we've already sort of figured out that reading from them is much easier than reading from a photo.
Definitely. Oh, that's very concise and very exciting. Thank you. Yes, excuse me. Josh has just disappeared to get Oliver, who you may hear wailing in the background, who very cooperatively decided not to sleep as long as he normally does. So he may or may not be joining us for part of the interview. Hopefully he will stop screaming. So thank you for that introduction, Sarah. That was lovely. How did you get on over the summer? What kinds of things were you able to scan? Did you get as much done as you hoped you would?
So I guess, like any project, I did not get as much done as I hoped I would.
You never do. Never.
You never do.
I was going to get so much stuff done this summer. No.
I feel like those are half the academic jokes on Twitter, like all the things you plan to do versus what you get done over the summer. And mostly because I underestimated how much time working with computers would take. It's really hard to look at an object and watch the mess that the computer puts together and think, I see why these photos go together. Why don't you see how these photos go together? But I spent a lot of time in in Brown University Library's digital production services offices, where one of the library photographers, Lindsay Elgin, was helping me put together the photogrammetry setup. Mm-hmm. So she did a lot to set up the camera, get the best settings on the camera to get really good images. And then Erica Saladino in the bindery in the library put together these really awesome stands to hold all the objects to keep them safe.
Nice.
Because we had the horrifying realization of opening up some of the boxes and finding that some tablets were just bags of dust. They were once were tablets that are now bags of just clay dust.
Oh, no.
And part of that comes from just all the handling over the years. And so Erica put together these awesome stands so the tablets were never in contact with you or a hard
You don't have to touch them.
You just set them down very gently and then you don't touch them for a long time.
Well, do you want to explain a little bit about how photogrammetry works?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing for photogrammetry is just basically means putting together a 3D model from a lot of photos of an object from different angles and different views. So what we did is we put the object on a potter's wheel and we marked off every 10 degrees. So there were 36 photos that we would take. And so you'd set up the camera with one setting in one focus. And then the trick was to try not to kick the tripod or the camera, because then you'd have to start over, which I did a couple times. And then it feels a little like making a claymation movie. You take a photo, move the object a little bit, take another photo until it goes all the way around. Mm-hmm. And then you change the elevation of the camera. So we did one straight on, one from underneath, and then one from above. And then we turned the object over. And this was we had to do 4 elevations for some of the foundation pegs, because we would take the photos, do all of the processing, and find that we hadn't photographed enough of the tip. Mm-hmm. And we would wait hours and hours, and then the model would be missing.
And it wouldn't work.
We're like, well, everything looks great, but it has a hole in the top of it.
So then you take all the photos, and then you just feed them through a computer program, and it kind of mushes everything together. Is a very simplistic way of explaining what happens, but mushes everything together.
I apologize for interrupting. Megan, you might have to come in here and take over the interview from in here.
I'll be sorry.
So if you want to go ahead and shut your Zoom down.
Okay.
Sorry, Sarah. Sorry, everyone.
No worries.
Okay. And Oliver's found the door. Bye. Yeah, he's. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Text me if you need me. Come on, buddy. Come on.
Bye.
Yeah.
Oh God, no. Okay, that is one very sad little boy. Sorry, he is in the middle of dropping his first nap, which means that he's not sleeping anywhere near as much as he is used to, which leads to lots of that kind of melting down. But so, yes, we were talking about photogrammetry, and you take all of these photographs and then you feed them through a computer, and hopefully you get a 3D model without holes.
Yes, hopefully. And we used a program called Metashape. It has a 30-day trial where people can sort of play around with it and try things. But I was lucky enough that the library bought the program for me.
Nice.
And just the academic license is $500, which is crazy. And that's even with that large academic discount.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky to be able to use it. And you have to, and it does its best to put all the photos together. And Lindsay and I sort of figured out some little kinks with the program. Every once in a while, you could put all of the photos from the object together into one chunk of the program, and it would give you a beautiful point cloud and be like, great, perfect, you got it. But sometimes you had to teach the program a little bit. And so you'd have to do the top separately, then the bottom separately, and then try it all together. And then there were a couple of times where the computer just never got it, and I had to manually align the two halves.
Oh, gosh.
But because so many of the foundation pegs had inscriptions that mentioned God names, the little rule that I did for myself is I put a marker inside every dingir sign. And so they just matched up together.
Perfect.
I was like, what sign is repeated over and over again?
Yeah,
this one is.
Definitely. Oh, that's wonderful. So now, how many did you manage to get done?
So we got 10 objects done.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so all of the foundation pegs are done, and now we're moving on to tablets.
Yes, I love me a foundation peg. For those who don't know what foundation pegs are, it's actually the image in our thumbnail today. That is a foundation peg. They're these cones with sometimes they have a flat nail bit protrusion. I have actually a handy. Sometimes they have a flat nail bit at the top. Sometimes it's just like a cone. But they're super cool and interesting, and I like them very much. So it's exciting that there are so many scanned.
They're probably the coolest to look at in scan form because they're not uniform like a tablet would be. Although we also found out something pretty interesting in looking through these objects. There are a lot of old records that are just slipped in a folder in the same box as the object. And there's lots of really cool information on them. But someone went through at one point and wrote the object number on some of those records. And my project partner and I found out that 2 of the foundation pegs actually got switched at some point in their history because their their inscriptions are very similar, but not quite the same. And so we went to a library and we're like, we think M12 and M19 got switched at some point. Like all of their paperwork and all of their documentation, they should belong to each other.
That's awesome. So did they switch them back?
Yeah, they did.
Excellent. So, because I've heard stories of sometimes someone has made that kind of identification and the library's been like, or the museums be like, meh. It doesn't happen often, but it's nice when they actually listen to you about, this is wrong, please fix it. Yeah,
definitely. There's one box where it was just 2 foundation pegs, and their numbers were completely mixed around at all points, to the point where I was staring at the box and staring at my file names. I'm like, did I switch it, or did it switch?
Was it switched already? What happened?
It's like, what did I do?
So now you have these 10 scans. What are you going to do with them?
So right now, the goal will be to put them in the Brown digital repository, where they can live, because there's really not proper documentation of these objects at Brown, and there are really going to be. But on a wider scale, I want to put them on Sketchfab, so people can access them more widely. But I also want to make sort of a virtual exhibit for them online.
Cool.
We want to put the objects online. We want to pair them with information just about what these objects are, who is mentioned in them, because we have a letter from Hammurabi, which I know is, that's something that people read in intermediate Akkadian, and so Hammurabi is someone you learn about in 6th grade when you first learn about Mesopotamia. And so it would be really useful to have all of this information in one place. And I think back to my 6th grade education, when I first learned about the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia specifically. I knew conceptually what cuneiform was, but I'd never seen it until I got to college. And so being able to have a teacher pull this up on a computer, or be able to go home with your own homework maybe, and have your teacher say, like, go to this website. I also want to display the objects with the records that we found with them, because I realized as I came across these records that I tend to think of the sort of object biographies of these things as, okay, they were made in ancient Iraq in 2300 BC, and then they were lost for a long time, and someone dug them up, and then that's it. But they live lives long after that. People interact with them. People move them around. Like, some objects have sale records with them, and have Edgar J. Banks's letterhead. And then one object has a letter written to the person who actually donated the foundation peg to Brown. And it's written by Ferris J. Stevens, who was one of the curators of the Yale Babylonian collection in the 1930s. And it basically says, like, "Dear Mr. Green, here's the translation of the object you requested," which is pretty cool.
That's very cool. Oh, wow. So, and will this, well, first, will the records be, like, available to view publicly through your online display? Is that that's the plan?
Yeah. So because I've was working with Lindsay, who's a photographer, when I showed her these things that were with the objects, she wanted to photograph them with the really fancy document camera. Ooh. So be really high res, and some of the writing is fading, and so we'd be able to get better.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we've had a couple of questions, and one of them at least is pertinent to what we've been talking about. So Magnus Hansen says, is there a plan to 3D print these at any point, or make them available for 3D printing?
Yes, actually, and that is something that we are currently struggling with in a couple of ways. What Metashape lets you do is it lets you scale objects and sort of embed that into the information of the 3D model, because otherwise, if you just put this on Sketchfab and someone tried to 3D print it, if the computer doesn't know how big it is, it might try and print it like 5 feet tall. And then suddenly you're spending a lot of money and time on this massive object.
You've got a 5-foot foundation peg.
And so we've been taking photos of the objects with scale bars and trying best as we can to mash that information in with the model, so people can 3D print them and 3D print them easily without having to do the scaling process on their own.
Excellent.
I think last time I interviewed, someone asked about like whether it would be easy to fake these objects. And I think I mentioned something about, oh yeah, you can like insert something into the model that shows, turns out a lot of the objects have museum labels on them, and we accidentally digitized them. And so now they're in the model, and that's just how.
That's fantastic. So Paul asks whether, this is a good one, and we get this occasionally. Is it possible to identify like the handwriting of an individual scribe or specific quirks or something along those lines?
There are specific quirks that you can find, but it's really hard to link them to a person. As I'm sure as other seriologists run into, Mesopotamians were not big on identifying themselves in texts. They do it so rarely, and even when it does happen, we're not even sure if it's a real identification or just kind of a literary one. There are little quirks, like in class, we've read letters and we'll be like, oh, this scribe likes to spell this word this way, where the scribe likes to spell it this way. But I think, I think in addition to the sort of materiality studies that have been coming along with tablets, has sort of been leading into this like handwriting idea, and whether, I actually TA'd for a high school class this summer where we talked about cuneiform a little bit, and I asked them, I was like, do you think that you have to be right-handed to write cuneiform because of the way the wedge is faced? And they had this whole discussion, and they were all testing it because it's an experimental archaeology class. It was really interesting.
That's very cool. Awesome. And one question that is currently being debated in the chat, Timothy Bolton says he's curious as to why no one has built a decipher, so like a program, I assume, for all of these tablets. It seems like it would be so damn simple. You build the app, scan the objects, and have them translated. It sounds wonderful. It sounds fantastic. And there are people working on that, but it is not quite that simple.
Yeah, there are. I actually have a friend who's been looking at the 3D models that I've been making for his own computer program that is attempting to read the cuneiform signs. There are a lot of programs that attempt to do it with photos, but because of the nature of cuneiform, there's always a shadow in those photos because everything is an imprint. But on 3D models, you don't get that shadow. And so that's why he's been using some of my models to test his program. But while the program can tell you what the sign is, it can't tell you the reading. It needs all that, because I think we as humans use the contextual information, everything around that sign, to suggest how it should be read in that space. The one thing that I did tell my friend that would be a good application for his program is helping deal with broken tablets. If the program can read part of a sign and give you all the possible options, then have a better chance of choosing what might have been there, which is harder to do when you're a human with a book. But all of that contextual information, picking the right reading, I get that wrong all the time. And I don't know. That's probably the toughest thing for the computer to do.
It's tricky. And so if you're unfamiliar with cuneiform and how it works, each sign can have multiple different meanings, including full words, several different full words in some cases, and several different phonetic readings. So for each sign you read, there's like a minimum of 3 different possibilities for what it actually says. So choosing the correct meaning is actually quite challenging. And those meanings vary over time and geographical region and genre. So if you're reading Old Babylonian literary texts, the sign choices or the sign values are going to be different to like an early dynastic economic text. The signs may be the same, but the readings will be very different. And that seems to be one of the main issues with digitizing or automating cuneiform translations, is giving the computer enough data that it knows like what sign values it's working with, what period of time it's working with. So there are people working on it. Sarah's friend is working on it. I have a friend on Twitter who's doing like very preliminary work into that, and like the Google Summer of Coding, I think one of the projects that they released was a cuneiform reading challenge. So people are working on it. many very intelligent people, very talented coders are working on it. It's not quite as simple as it may seem, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get it right.
Definitely. And if there's one thing that I learned this summer that's drilled into me forever, it's that computers are stupid. So our phones and our computers can do so much that we tend to think that they're really smart. They can do all of these different things. But the fact is, unless you tell them exactly what you want, they don't do it. They're stupid. They can't figure out what you mean or stuff. And so with writing and all the nuances that especially like Mesopotamian scholars would use in their writing when they were trying to be clever or use puns and whatnot, the computer just may not be smart enough to
follow that. Get it, which is fair because half of the time I don't get it either.
Yeah, a lot of the time I show up for class and I was like, I read it this way, and the teacher's like, well, what about this way? I was like, oh, dang.
That would have made more sense, wouldn't it?
Or you think you've identified a verb, you look it up and you're like, well, that means to vomit. So that's
probably not right. Or you get a fantastic, you look up the verb and it's like a meaning that is very viable. And then you look at the bottom of the page and you find it's only used once in the wrong time period, like 500 miles south. So, well, it's probably not that one either then, is it?
Or you get the opposite where you get a verb and you're like, that can't be it. But then you finish the rest of the sentence, you're like, oh, maybe that is it.
Might be.
I remember first year Acadian reading Hammurabi's laws and getting in a test, the verb was like to set on fire. And I was like, oh. And then I read the rest of the thing. It was about setting someone's house on fire. And I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Beautiful. We have another question, and everyone, if you do have questions for Sarah, please put them in the side chat and tag me at Digital Hammurabi so I see them. LT Galloway says, how long on average does it take to complete your work on an object from start to finish?
That's a great question. Photography itself can take about an hour and a half, just taking all the photos, setting everything up. Then the biggest time suck comes from the computer program. I'm working on a very high-powered computer that only runs Metashape, but even so, the processing on the computer for the first step can take about 2 hours, and then the next step can take about 4 hours. After that, it's all very quick, but I spent a lot of time sitting next to the computer working on other things while the computer ran. Which made it all the more heartbreaking whenever it would produce something that was just wrong.
So in terms of workflow, how did you do it? Did you set everything up and take all of the photographs first, or did you like work on, like, get the photographs for one, start it running in MetaLabs, and then start the photography for the second object?
Yeah, we sort of did a mix of the second one. So we took a few object photos first, and then I spent time just working the kinks out of the processing. Also just to make sure that our photo setup was doing what we wanted it to do and that the computer was having an easy enough time reading those photos. One thing that I didn't want to do was I didn't want to photograph all the objects, realize the way we had done everything wasn't working for the computer, and then have to go back and do it all over again. So I sort of did it in chunks. So I'd like photograph a few objects, and then I would process them, and then I'd go back and photograph a few objects and process them.
Excellent. DLJ says, is wondering whether cuneiform tablets might contain orthographic errors.
Yeah, there are a lot of scribal errors
all the time,
and it's really fun and also sometimes funny. Because I like the human element that it adds, especially because Mesopotamian scholars and scribes don't name themselves very often. It's kind of fun to have their humanity come out in their writing a little bit. There are also some texts where we only have one copy, and it's done, we think it might be done by a student or something, and so it has several errors. And I think it would be funny to think, if someone found your second grade composition and that was the only copy of that composition ever, but people read it for hundreds of years after it was found, you would probably hate that, but it's kind of funny.
It's the best we have. No, orthographic errors are fascinating and really annoying, especially as a beginning student, because you know what it should say, it doesn't say that, and you run yourself ragged trying to work out why, if it's some like unique verbal form or if it's a miswritten sign, and then you find out actually the scribe just wrote the wrong thing down. So
yeah, and when you're just learning a language, you tend to think any issue is yours and not the author's. Yep. And so you're like, I'm messing this up, even though it's not you.
And then you get to class and your professor says, no, that just shouldn't be there. We're not sure what that is. Oh. So El Mazaras says, Sarah, is this something that could scale up for larger collections, or would it work best for collections like what Brown has? Do you have any idea what a larger scale project would look like?
So just from the large time commitment I've been experiencing, it does seem like this best fits for small collections. And that's kind of why I latched on to Brown's collection for this project, in that it would be a really good test case because it's small. But now I have such a renewed appreciation for all of the museum professionals, especially, who keep getting these comments like, oh, just digitize the collection. And it took me all summer to do 10 objects. And even then they're not done. They're not all scaled. All of the records that go with them aren't paired up or high quality photographed. So as fun as it is to do this for these small collections, I imagine it might be a logistical nightmare for a larger collection. Although I know some larger collections are starting this process, but also seem to have worked out a streamlined system with larger equipment, so they don't have to do the turning the object manually, take the photo. They have something that just does it.
Just takes all of the photos at once and then you feed it through.
Yeah, exactly.
Raphael Block says, day-to-day life fascinates me. Are there latrine digs like in the US where we learn about common people's habits and activities?
I read plenty of papers about that, but I'm not an archaeologist, even as cool as it is. And so I don't know too much about that. Although, another HAPS scholar might, Melina Seabrook, because she is an archaeologist.
We'll ask Melina when she comes back. I will say generally, especially the earlier excavations did tend to focus on monumental architecture and elite material culture. So there is a massive bias in the archaeology that we have towards the elites, towards like official building projects, royal activities, but there are a lot of very good archaeologists working on non-elites, non-royals, on things like production and day-to-day life. So we don't have as much as we might like, but it's coming. People are working on it actively. Gooba P, I love that name. Are any of these human errors in the tablets, the orthography, maybe intentional humor, so intentional errors to be read as puns?
I mean, certainly, with all of the different readings that each sign can have, there could be a joke in there that we're not getting. There are some really good articles. I think Ben Foster wrote one about humor in Mesopotamian literature and whatnot. And when you read it, you think, wow, they really were not that funny. But there could be things for sure that are intentional on their part that we read as errors, because there's such a large time and space and cultural gap between us and those scribes.
Sorry, I was answering a question, and if I don't mute my microphone when I type, it sounds like there's a machine gun in the room. So the final question we have at the moment, and then if no one else has anything to add, we'll wrap this up and let Sarah get back to her life. Tim Smith is asking if you could please further explain foundation pegs.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Megan, I also think foundation pegs are really cool because they're some of the most explicit writing we have, yet they're hidden from us, which the distinction between those two things is really fascinating. Basically, they're shaped like pegs. Like Megan said, they have sometimes very explicitly like nails, and they have sort of dedication inscriptions. They talk about, this was built at this time. There's usually dedication to the gods. It's really explicit with the building project. As far as foundation objects, like most things. The Neo-Assyrian kings did it the most extra, where they would use all different kinds of materials and all different kinds of colored tablets and put them in these stone boxes. But most of the ones we have are ones kind of like what I have. They're made out of clay. And these dedication inscriptions, and they're under the foundation of the building. It was really important in Mesopotamia that if a building were to be rebuilt, you were supposed to find that original foundation and rebury it with your own foundation deposit to make sure that your building was in that right place. Because it wasn't just, it wasn't considered just like this would be a great place to put a building. It's nice and flat. Mm-hmm. There was meaning in sort of construction. Mm-hmm. And the act of creation always involved the gods. And so there was this ceremonial aspect to it. Although we don't fully understand what kind of ritual action went around the foundation pegs. There's a great article that describes the Hittite version of it, which is sort of the closest analog that we have, describes hammering a nail in and making a sort of analogous looking nail, which is sort of what we have. So we think maybe it might have been a similar ritual to that of the Hittites, but we're not sure.
Thank you. Before we finish, do you want to talk briefly about the conference?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go for it.
So on October 3rd and 4th here at Brown, myself, Shane Thompson, and Christian Casey will be hosting a conference called At the Margins, which is sort of focusing on frontier studies in the ancient Near East. We have scholars who work on Egypt, Anatolia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia, coming to talk about this larger theme in regards to their work. Our goal was we saw people working on frontier studies in sort of different corners of Near Eastern studies, but weren't really interacting with each other in scholarship. And so we wanted to put them all in the same room and
talk to each other.
And so that's how we've sort of formatted the conference. Each session only has 2 participants because we want them to thematically work in the same area, but in geographically different areas. So we want to sort of put them against each other and show all of the sort of ways things sync up and ways that they don't. And one really exciting thing about that conference is that it will be live streamed on YouTube by Digital Hammurabi. So anyone who's not able to make it out to Providence should definitely check out the Digital Hammurabi YouTube channel. Almost all of the presentations.
I'm really excited.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. And you're creating this conference because we wanted to push scholarship a little bit. But there was the thought, this would be great for people to see, but how do we make this more accessible? And the live stream was sort of the perfect opportunity to do that.
I saw so that we have a professional mailing list that goes out that tells people about conferences coming up and papers being published. And I saw the At the Margins flyer come out and thought, oh, that looks really interesting. And then I read who was organizing it and I thought, oh, it's Sarah. I know Sarah. I wonder if she'd let me live stream this. So I emailed her and it was like, yes, please. So we're excited and it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, and we had so many more people register than we were expecting. So the original plan was we were just going to take the conference participants out to individual, different lunches in different groups. But we have so many people coming that were like, okay, we're going to bring lunch in, because we didn't want to be the people who were like, okay, go find lunch on your own now that you've paid to get here.
Well,
so we'll everyone will have coffee, and we plan to have breakfast, even though there's breakfast provided at the hotel where the participants are staying, because when I was an admissions counselor traveling around, I stayed in Hampton Inns and Homewood Suites, and the eggs are really bad, and so I didn't want to make anyone eat those eggs.
Wonderful. Okay, we've had no more new questions, so thank you everyone for joining us. As ever, fantastic questions, really interesting discussion. Sarah, thank you so much for coming back and telling us about your work. Thank you for applying to HAPS. We're absolutely thrilled to have been able to help you. And to everyone who donated to HAPS, thank you. You guys are the reason that we're able to do this fantastic stuff. And we will be starting, so we've been continuing collecting money for HAPS 2020. The Patreon, we have a Patreon for HAPS. It's patreon.com/HAPS fund. If you have some spare money and you feel like funding starving PhD students over the summer months, please consider donating. You get to vote on what research you would like to see funded. It's very exciting. We like it very much. If you want to just give a one-time donation, we definitely accept those. We have a PayPal account. If you go, I think the PayPal button should be somewhere on our YouTube channel. If it's not, then just send the money to digitalhammurabi@gmail.com. Please put a note in there somewhere saying that it's for HAPS, because otherwise we will spend it on books. Just the hazard of the job, we spend money on books. Yes, and stay tuned, because in a couple of weeks we have our second HAPS scholar, Jenna Kemp, coming to talk to us about her research work. And Sarah, thank you again. I will see you next month for a very exciting conference.
We'll see you in person.
Yes. And let me find the outro button. There we go. Thank you again, everybody. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?